Hello there, everyone. My name is Nadhan. I'm the Global Chief Architect Leader in the Field CTO organization at, take a guess, RedHat. Today, we are going to tell a story about simplification, simplifying the complexity of the IT landscape. With me here today, I have the privilege to stand right next to Kyle Brown from IBM. Kyle?
Thank you very much, Nadhan. Hi, I'm Kyle Brown. I'm an IBM Fellow, and I'm the CTO for the IBM CIO office.
So the story here is really about, where IT is today, where the technology landscape is today. And we're going to build it up. You're seeing the boxes and lines, but we're going to, as we tell the story, we're going to write the chapters, write the text. And at the end of the day, voila, you're going to have a book on how IT can be simplified. So, Kyle, when you look at the journey that IBM has gone through, is going through, what are some of the platforms, the environments that IBM has? And that is very typical, I would say, of what we see in the industry.
We are typical. We're a big company, just like most other big companies. And so if you think about the problem that we have, for instance, workloads on Z. Z is at the core of our business, and we do a lot of work on IBM Z platforms. But Z is not where all of our workloads sit. We have cloud workloads, not just in the IBM cloud, but in multiple clouds. So we have to deal with the fact that we have those all over. We have on-prem workloads in our data centers that we also have to think about as we're looking at all of the different possibilities of the different things that we're running there. What's more, we also have workloads that are virtualized, that run in all of these different places, on Z, on-prem, on cloud, everywhere. And then finally, we do have some edge workloads, particularly in our content management. We have devices at the edge that we have to control too. And if you put this all together, that basically represents the problem that we face at the CIO. We have to live with all of these different workloads and managing all of these different platforms.
Here is what is fascinating, Kyle. I know this is the IBM story, but then as you and I, when we go out to meet with customers, to me, this seems very, very typical of what customers tell they have in their enterprise, you have in your enterprise.
Absolutely. As I've talked to a number of customers and we've talked about these very same set of platforms, they all agree that looks exactly like what we have. And so that begins a conversation that we can start to have around what did we learn about how to live in an environment that's distributed across many different platforms like this.
So as we write this book, Kyle, I'm going to take a twist, a detour, if you will, right? And that is, how about if we talk about how IBM and Red Hat come together with the solutions we have, the approaches we have, the technologies on how we can work not only just between ourselves, but with our partners to make lives better for our customers. Why don't we tell that story?
Sounds great.
So, Kyle, when you have this many environments, and these are, they come across as singular boxes, but really, you have many, many, many instances of these. I cannot even begin to imagine, how do you deal with that? What is this thing, that I like the box here, but what goes in there, Kyle?
That was the first of the major decisions we ended up having to make to really understand how to manage something this disparate. And that is, we had to have a common automation strategy. We realized that you can't just manage all of these environments by throwing people at the problem. You have to be able to automate the management, the installation, the operation of all of those different pieces of your puzzle. And so common automation is absolutely critical to what you need to be able to solve this problem, and importantly, to build up any of the layers that come on top of that.
That's great. Automation is, we will get into AI, the two-letter magic word. I would submit, Kyle, that it's important to have an automation strategy before thinking about an AI strategy. So I'm delighted, so everyone watching, bear in mind, if you are talking about an AI strategy, take a pause. Ask yourself, how is your automation strategy? How is our automation strategy? So Great start, Kyle. Okay, fine. It's automated all over the place. What comes next?
So the next decision we had to make after deciding on a common automation strategy was we had to come up with a common containerization strategy. Because in fact, what we found is that most of the workloads we have were all fitting into a very small number of patterns, meaning that there was an awful lot of similarity between hundreds of these different workloads. And what we found is that by putting them into common images and building a common container approach, we were able to, in the end, move from having workloads that were completely different across these different platforms into workloads that were very similar. And the great news is containerization works across all of these different environments.
Now, you irk my curiosity here. So, did the containerization strategy in recent times influence the virtualization strategy by any chance?
It absolutely did for us. And particularly what we're looking at now are some of the newest changes in open source. And we are now moving away from a strategy that, let's say, was a pure virtualization strategy to one that is instead more tightly integrated with the backplane of the containerization strategy. Not to mention that the increasing costs of virtualization have also moved us to increase our amount of containerization we have and move even more strongly into a fully containerized environment.
So those of you who are watching the video who are dealing with any challenges related to virtualization, bookmark this so that you can come back and revisit that for your enterprise. Great, Kyle. So we have the operating environments, we have automated, we have containerized. There is some critical element missing here. Data.
Absolutely. You can't have a CIO office without data because everything runs on data. It's the fuel that runs the entire organization. Now, when I think about data, I have to think about it in three different forms. First of all, there's data at rest. Now, what that means is that's essentially everything that's sitting in your databases. You have to be able to not only think about where you want to store everything, but how you want to manage it, what the standards are around it, and how you deal with it. Then, obviously, you've already started working on data in motion. That's what are the strategies you're going to have around being able to make sure that you understand how applications communicate with each other. What are the kinds of approaches you're going to take, be they queue-driven or event-driven or API-driven? You have to work out all of those different pieces. It's the last one that's a little bit unusual. When we're talking about data at rest, and even when we're talking about data in motion, we're usually talking about structured data. But that's not all of the data we have. We have lots and lots of unstructured data or content. And where that has really become important in the last few years is this is, again, the fuel that drives AI. Being able to have a content strategy for your data, especially one that involves vectorization and the ability to take advantage of vector databases and multiple different types of search, allows you to be able to effectively take advantage of the new capabilities of new AI models like large language models.
That's great. So now when I start thinking about the consumers, the customers, right, the app, we all have our phones and there are different interfaces. The application is the face of the enterprise to the customer. So why are we doing all this? Yes, it is to simplify, but to simplify for whom? It's the end consumer, right? So I would submit, let me take a guess. This is all about the applications. And all together, I would say, especially the containerization is really the platform for application. Would you agree, Kyle?
It is. And if this is the application layer, and that's where all of the magic happens is inside of your applications, the rest of what we've seen beneath it is how we support that layer of applications. Now, that can be both custom applications or off-the-shelf applications, third-party applications. They still need that support of the underlying containerization and automation layer, and they need the support of that data layer to be able to do the work that they need to do. And so what we've done as part of this is we have, as we've talked about, been on this journey to not only containerize our applications, but to modernize our applications to be able to take advantage of this containerized automated environment.
Excellent. So, we don't know who is going to be watching the video. There could be several different roles, right? So you could be a CIO, you could be a decision maker, an influencer. So what's in it for you? What you're seeing here is, yes, the hard truth is that the technology landscape is complex, but the approach, the solution, and how we address the challenges does not have to be. You can simplify it. That's what we heard from Kyle, how this can and should be simplified. Simplification leads to standardization, it leads to easier management, and then the KPIs that you have, time to deploy, realizing value, business value, all of those come along with. The magic word is simplification. That's what you have, especially if you are a decision maker in a position to justify, rationalize why we have what we have from an IT perspective. On the other hand, you could be an engineer, you could be a developer, you could be an operator. Let's talk about operators. Life is much easier if the right things are automated so that you can focus on what cannot be automated and what should not be. Frankly, there needs to be that human touch. So you can actually focus on the intelligence of the patterns that you're seeing so that when you do root cause analysis, there is actually more meaning to it. You leverage the automation, you leverage the analytics to do it right. There are some things that only the human brain can do. So that's what is in there for operators. Hello, developers. Let's talk about this here. And to do all this, you need somebody to actually do it, right? And then write the code and think through the logic and the algorithms and all of that. What is this layer, Kyle?
That's the developer tools layer. And that's absolutely critical to be able to take advantage of any of the capabilities we've talked about beneath it. Now, for us, what we found is that there were several different pieces of this developer tool layer that were really important. First of all, we had to be able to essentially get a handle on the explosion that we had of CI/CD environments. One of the things about architecture that has happened over the last few years is that very deeply distributed architectures, things like microservices architectures, have become very popular. Microservices architectures are great, but they have this kind of interesting side effect in that they make the number of CI/CD platforms you have multiply like rabbits. They're everywhere. And it becomes very important to set some standards and to essentially build tools that can help your teams to be able to work more effectively in that kind of highly distributed environment. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up putting together a common CI/CD layer supporting a number of other tools, including things like developer metrics and including other things like now we're getting into AI code assistance, all of which are supported by a common set of underlying tools that give you the ability to use the different pieces of this platform.
Excellent. So I would yes, we have been talking about customers, the external consumer, the external customers. But frankly, from my perspective, developers are the internal customers. So if we make these environments easy to use for the developer so that a minute of the developer's time realizes value thanks to the underlying platforms and the efficiencies that are built in, the developers can actually produce more rapidly and be more relevant to the features that the customers are looking for. That's another reason why IBM is doing all of this, right? So that the developers can actually get value out of the environments they are in. And we live in a world today, if the developers don't get what they need, they're going to go west. They're going to go elsewhere and then do things where they actually have the environments they like. Would you agree, Kyle?
I completely agree. And speaking of our friends, the developers, the one thing that everyone likes now and that everyone is incorporating into, it seems, every application in our entire portfolio is AI, which is our last bucket that we have here. Now, the interesting thing about AI is that it follows a lot of the principles that we've been talking about through these other layers. You have to have a strategy for how you're going to deal with AI. You have to have an environment in which you're going to be running your LLMs and in which you're going to be especially gaining access to those piles of data that are important not just for training and fine-tuning, but also for things like the RAG pattern, and you need to be able to get to your applications running here through things like the React pattern to allow you to be able to not just have large language models play interesting tricks with language, but to be able to make them do things that are useful to your business. And so that's the last of the layers that we've seen to be really important here, is you have to be able to have a common standardized way of doing things so that everyone doesn't go off and do things in their own way, which can create not only interesting problems in being able to manage your portfolio, but especially ethical and security problems.
Now, AI can actually write code too, right? So how would you distinguish between what would AI come out with versus what the developer still needs to write? It's not like the developers don't have to write code anymore. There is a balance there, right?
Absolutely. There's a deep division that we have here in that, let's say a lot of people think that AI can write all of your code. But the only people that think that are the people who actually aren't writing the code. Instead, what we found is AI can be a great helper in writing code. You still have to have very good specifications for it. You still have to know what the outcomes are that you want from it. In other words, you have to be able to specify what you want from your tests. You have to be able to specify what you want in terms of being able to describe the architecture of the outcome. And so that's why what we've seen as part of the developers' tools and as part of the tools that we're building on top of developers' tools, what is instead a partnership rather than AI taking over the entire business of being a developer or being a manager or being an operator as part of any of the pieces of this puzzle.
Excellent. So you're the CTO to the CIO, right, at IBM. So what does the CISO have to say about it, Kyle, right? Where does security come in?
I have to say that security is at top of mind for all of us all the time. And so it's something that cuts across all of these different layers. We have to think about our physical security that we have. We have to think about what it means to be securing our operating systems and our containers. We have to think about data security. We have to think about application level security. All of these different pieces are something where security enters into the equation, and we have to balance that as part of the overall approach that we're trying to set up.
That's fantastic. As I look at the different personas who could be watching the video, we talked about the decision makers, we talked about the engineers, both the developers and the operators. There is one segment that we haven't spoken about. Those are the next generation of innovators from academia, from the faculty, from the students. So those of you who are in high school, in graduate schools, and so on, you are the next generation of the workforce. There is a lot going on here, guys and gals, for you. Because what you're seeing here is not just the technology of today. You're seeing how this is positioning for the emerging technologies that are coming around, and also how we got here. History is very important in understanding where we are going. So what you heard in this book that we wrote just in the last few minutes is where we were, starting with the Z, how we evolved to on-prem virtualization to the cloud, going to the edge, and how we have continued to grow vertically leading up to artificial intelligence. Thanks for watching. Before you leave, please remember to click like and subscribe.